Welcome to the Containment Zone. There are things in the woods that should not walk like us. Things with bones in the wrong places, smiles stitched from something ancient, and eyes that reflect nothing, not even fear. They do not run from the headlights. They do not flee the sound of footsteps. They stand still, and they watch. SCP-6448 is not a deer, but it wears the idea of one like a poorly cut mask, stretched too thin over something else, something older. I remember the first report like a splinter in the side of my memory. It came in from a seasonal ranger stationed along the edge of the George Washington National Forest, just north of Roanoke, Virginia. The message was brief, stilted, audio quality degraded, probably from stress or interference. There's something walking upright in the trees. Looks like a deer. But its legs, the legs bend wrong. It's watching me. Not afraid. Not blinking. It just keeps shifting. That call ended with 5 seconds of heavy breathing, then silence. They never found the ranger, only his boots, facing west, placed side by side. The initial designation of SCP-6448 was procedural, forest entity, quadrupedal mimicry, threat level low. But low threats don't generate sleep paralysis in trained field agents. Low threats don't trigger mass wildlife migration. Low threats don't leave entire counties silent. The first anomaly clusters began near Botator County, then Franklin, then Bedford. Reports from rural civilians came in surges, sightings of malformed deer wandering too close to homes, standing motionless at odd hours. 3117 a.m. was noted repeatedly, and always the same description: legs that bend too many times, eyes too wide, but never blinking, antlers like tangled wires, sometimes shifting mid-sentence. But the part that stuck, the part that made every report spiral into nervous silence, was always this: words that didn't belong in a mouth like that. Disjointed syllables. Is this, what, you, fear, said with a voice that sounded like a cassette being chewed in reverse. Agents embedded in the area logged similar experiences. One Level 3 linguistics specialist from Site-14 was found mumbling in the corner of his containment van after contact. He wrote nothing down, just scratched a phrase into his wrist with a hunting knife: not prey, never prey, not deer. He died from blood loss before medical arrived. They say he was smiling. Task Force Lambda 12, Pinecone Patrol, was deployed under cover of routine ecological survey. Disguised as wildlife enforcement, they moved through the Shenandoah Valley in pairs. The woods swallowed their radio signal. Nightfall came early in those parts, not because the sun fell faster, but because the trees learned how to drink it. Out there, you forget what time is. And when night comes, they begin to whisper. Reports from Lambda 12 are scattered and inconsistent. Audio recordings are corrupted, even analog tape. Transcripts degrade or rearrange themselves. But certain themes repeat across all surviving entries: reversed movement patterns, footsteps that echo before they're made. Physical mirroring, entities taking on the agent's voice, posture, or name. Indistinct sounds near campsites, dry heaving, bone cracking, syllables forced through vocal cords not meant for language. But worst of all were the encounters. They never began with violence. That came later. It always started with a single figure standing in the clearing, watching. Sometimes alone. Sometimes surrounded by regular deer, none of which moved or blinked. And then it would tilt its head, not in curiosity, but like something rehearsing empathy. One agent, Ramirez, described it in his final journal entry. They are not here to feed. They are not here to hunt. They are here to remind us of what the forest remembers. It has a mouth now, and it is practicing. We never recovered Ramirez, only his body cam. It was found buried beneath a stack of deer antlers in a perfect circle, no soil disturbed, no signs of struggle. Just the footage, 43 minutes of silence, then 6 seconds of what looked like Ramirez smiling into the camera. And in the background, just behind him, half in frame, something standing upright. Watching, waiting, breathing. They are not deer. They are the memory of hunger, wearing a face we used to trust, and they do not forget the sound of your heartbeat. There are places in those forests where even the wind holds its breath. When I was first assigned to the SCP-6448 case, I thought it would be another low-tier rural anomaly. Some electromagnetic hallucination, a misclassified humanoid cryptid, or perhaps another cognitohazard tied to regional folklore. I packed light. I brought optimism. I left my intuition behind because I didn't think I would need it. The first thing I saw when I arrived was a sign, rusted and half sunk into the moss. Welcome to Craig Creek Trail. Keep to the path. Respect the deer. No one had mentioned that part before. The forest was already wrong. Not in any one detail, but in the accumulation of subtleties. Tree trunks leaning against gravity. Patches of bark stripped in symmetrical spirals. Birdsong that never quite resolved into melody. The worst was the silence between sounds. It wasn't absence, it was anticipation. Something was listening to me breathe. I met with Agent Solano at our temporary command post, a converted ranger cabin 10 kilometers from the epicenter of reported anomalies. He looked tired. More than that, he looked unraveled, like a man who had forgotten what it meant to sleep without dreaming of eyes. He didn't offer a handshake, just said, "They're mimicking the forest now. That's how they're learning." At first, I assumed he meant deer behavior, camouflage, scent masking, noise mimicry. But he explained something else, something deeper. The SCP-6448 entities weren't just pretending to be deer, they were performing the idea of a forest. Trees that weren't trees. Rocks that pulsed when you looked away. Shadows that followed a beat you couldn't hear. The further you walked in, the more reality began to fray, subtly. Time lost cohesion. Compass needles drifted. One researcher reportedly watched moss grow upward in real time. And somewhere beneath it all, the phrase kept surfacing, passed between staff, civilians, survivors, "It's not a deer." It had become like a virus of language, a mimetic compulsion to assert something so simple and yet so desperately untrue, because if you had to say it, then, on some level, you no longer believed it. By the third week, 5 field agents had gone missing. 3 were later recovered, disoriented and physically unharmed but deeply psychologically compromised. The other 2 were never found. Recovered agents described a presence that rewrote their perception of time and body. Agent Mallory, upon debriefing, explained, "You see it once, and it doesn't matter if you forget. It remembers you. That's what it does. It keeps a copy, a version of you, and then it sends that version back. But it isn't always perfect." He was retired from service 2 days later after attempting to disassemble the interior walls of Site 19 with his fingernails, claiming he needed to find the antlers beneath the drywall. His last words before sedation, "They're trying on me now." Field recordings became unreliable. Every electronic device used within the active zone began to malfunction. Analog film was overexposed without light. Digital files grew in size while supposedly idle. Audio devices picked up strange clicks that, when slowed, resembled human speech spoken backward and looped. A linguist brought in from Site 73 spent 6 hours listening to one recording. He quit the project that night and left a single note behind. "They're not speaking to us. They're speaking through us." Worse than the physical signs were the implications. Local deer populations dropped to nearly zero. Entire herds vanished overnight. Their absence never officially recorded, only whispered about in hushed tones at the edge of campfires. Those who claimed to see real deer often hesitated before calling them that, as if unsure if the label still applied. Some deer stood up, others did not. But they all watched, and the ones that stood always knew your name. By week 5, the Foundation began laying proximity wards and ontological stabilizers around the affected perimeter. But even the machines seemed unsure of themselves, triggering alarms in fractal patterns that didn't correlate to any physical breach. One D-class personnel assigned to carry the amulet used for resonance tracking never came back. His last recorded sentence, picked up by a partially functioning body cam, was not addressed to any agent. "Why are you wearing my face?" No movement was seen after that. Only the crunch of leaves, slow and deliberate, moving toward the camera, not running, just approaching. The cam feed glitched once. When it returned, the forest was empty. Only a small print in the dirt remained, a cloven hoof, slightly wrong in symmetry, beside a full human footprint, both moving in the same direction, together. There are things in the woods that remember our shape, and they are trying it on for size. There was a patrol schedule, rigid, redundant, ritualistic. It existed less to track anomalies, and more to reassure personnel that the world was still behaving in patterns. Every 4 hours, 2 agents in pairs, perimeter sweeps along predefined paths with mandatory check-ins at 10-minute intervals. After the incident with Agent Lewis, who walked into the trees humming a song he didn't know and was later found tracing circles in his own blood, no one was allowed out alone. But the pattern had cracks, always had. No matter how often we walked the routes, the forest changed. Not dramatically, just wrongly. A tree too many. A hill where there wasn't one yesterday. A stream flowing in reverse. We kept maps. We took photos. But the evidence always disagreed with itself. You'd swear there were 6 birches in that glade until the photos showed 7. Then 6 again. Then 5. Reality had seams here, and something was tugging at the threads. I remember the first time I heard one speak. It was just after dusk. I was doing an audio sweep with Agent Morales, equipment tuned to ultrasonics. We were about 2 kilometers beyond the designated safe perimeter, though that term had long become more political than practical. There was nothing safe here. Morales froze mid-step. His body went still, like a paused film. Then his lips moved, not speech, more like mimicry. Something trying on the idea of language. Why, do you walk like that? You are, my brother. You are, not dear. His eyes rolled back. He collapsed. I carried him back myself. He never spoke again. We ran every scan, neurological, mimetic, invasive cognition analysis. Nothing conclusive. The only consistency was that phrase, repeated once during REM. You are not dear. That phrase began to bleed into everything. Not just the mouths of the affected, but into documentation, signage, even Foundation software. One draft report from the Linguistic Analysis Department replaced every mention of SCP-6448 with the phrase, not dear. Someone or something was rewriting us. What troubled me most wasn't the phrase's meaning, it was the grammar. Not dear is not a name, it's not a description, it's a rejection. A negation wrapped in familiarity. You know what a deer looks like. But this isn't that, it only wants you to think it might be. We found remnants of the original herd. Their carcasses were stacked in unnatural spirals, limbs twisted, necks elongated, eyes peeled open and positioned to face east. Always east. One had been flayed delicately, the skin reassembled into a cloak draped over a branch. At a glance, it looked like a man, but there were too many ribs. DNA analysis confirmed something impossible. Each body registered as genetically identical to a baseline white-tailed deer, and to each other. Clones. Perfect copies. No differentiation, no genetic drift. Like someone was printing them from memory, but hadn't yet perfected the art of error-free replication. Agent Duncan, who had been cataloging the remains, vomited when one of the deer blinked. Despite being decapitated, it wasn't muscle spasm. It was a performance. Reports began to escalate. Civilians, hikers, even hunters started going missing outside our perimeter. Some were found. Most weren't. Those recovered told stories that paralleled our own, seeing something in the woods that watched too long, moved too smoothly, repeated a loved one's voice at night. One boy, age 13, was found naked and trembling beside a fire his missing father had built 3 nights prior. He whispered, "Dad's still out there, but he's learning how to wear me." We assigned him protective custody and level 2 monastics. 3 days later, he tried to walk back into the forest barefoot. When intercepted, he said, "If I go, I'll forget. That's how it works. I won't know what I am anymore." He was transferred to Site 19. His cell remains under 24-hour observation. Sometimes he sleeps on all 4s. Sometimes he hums birdsong that doesn't exist. The trees are listening. There is no consensus on what SCP-6448 wants. That's the problem. It's not hunting, not exactly. It's rehearsing, practicing, performing, like a child playing dress-up with godhood. Every interaction is an audition for a role we didn't realize we were casting, and every night it gets a little better. I've seen it once, I think. Just outside the tree line, a silhouette taller than it should be. Its joints were wrong. Its eyes were not eyes. But it moved like it had seen me walk, like it knew how my shoulders slouched, how my breath steamed in cold air. It waved, then disappeared between the pines. They are trying it on for size, and I'm starting to wonder if the size fits. The trees along the western border started shifting in ways no one could properly record. You could map them today, but tomorrow, the canopy would warp, the underbrush would twist, and a new clearing would open where none existed before. One researcher coined it topological suggestion, like the forest was suggesting an idea of space rather than following physical laws. The cartography team refused to return after one mapping drone transmitted a live feed that showed its own operator, walking alone through the wood's mouth slack, dragging the drone behind him on a length of exposed nerve tissue. He'd never left the observation van, and yet there he was. There is a cabin in Sector E. It should not exist. It does not appear on satellite imagery, thermal scans, or prior mission logs, but it has a door, a wood stove, a pair of boots by the entrance. Inside, everything is pristine. The bed made, a single plate set on the table, and on the wall, a framed photograph of someone you've never met but swear you recognize. For me, it was my brother. But he died in Syria 6 years ago. I checked the photograph later. It was just a deer, only the eyes were human and wet. Personnel reports began including increasingly bizarre behavioral shifts. A containment specialist, Agent Virens, suddenly spoke only in rhymed couplets, claiming that was the only way the forest listens. Dr. Hahn, normally precise and clinical, began labeling her own organs with Sharpie before morning debriefs. Lung, property of the wood. We instituted full psychological screenings. The results were inconclusive. No shared toxin, no identifiable pathogen. Just the same spiraling descent, memory fragmentation, pronoun drift, ritualized speech. Even I began to notice it. During meals, I caught myself watching how others chewed. During radio briefings, I mouthed their words silently, in perfect synchrony. I thought I was losing it. But then I reviewed the footage. I was speaking before they were. They mimic, but not blindly. This is imitation on a level beyond biology, something deeper, more ontological. Not just how you walk or speak, but how you think, how you remember. We analyzed intercepted phrases from the affected and discovered something chilling. The not dear don't just echo behavior. They rehearse memory structure. They don't need to see you to become you. They only need the idea of you. Enough people talking about you, thinking about you, dreaming. And the moment that collective conceptual mass reaches critical density, snap. You're theirs. We had a tech in records, Marnie, who discovered her own name in a containment file that she'd never accessed before. The file described her age, appearance, even her scar from a childhood surgery, but listed her as a minor reality-bending anomaly with mimetic potential. She reported it to Site Command. The next morning, her bed was neatly made, her locker cleaned out, her signature removed from every log she'd ever signed. No one remembered Marnie except me. I hope. It was around this time that the phrase returned, but not for many of the affected. It was in my own notes. I hadn't written it. They are trying it on for size. The phrase appeared between my field observations, written in a looping script I didn't recognize, nestled between details about auditory distortions and spatial drift. At first I thought it was contamination, but it kept appearing, on my mug, on sticky notes. Once, even written in condensation on the bathroom mirror. It wasn't taunting me. It was informing me, a reminder, a mantra, a warning. Something was learning what it meant to be me. I began to test it. I'd leave messages around camp details only I should know. Passwords, childhood memories, personal tics. I'd return hours later to find them slightly altered. My handwriting was imitated, but a bit too neat. My jokes rewritten, just off kilter. One memory replaced my old dog with a rabbit I never owned. What scared me most wasn't the errors. It was that they were improving. My handwriting started to resemble the forgeries. My memories started to prefer the replacements. They were more vivid, cleaner, as if the forest had edited them for clarity. I wasn't being hunted. I was being edited. Dr. Castor, who'd been with the project since its inception, proposed a radical hypothesis before his final assignment into Sector E. We're not just observing an anomaly. We're part of its drafting process. It's trying versions of us, like a sculptor molding clay until it likes the shape. He smiled, then added, "But what happens when it settles on one?" He never came back. They say something returned. A man in a Foundation jacket. Clean-shaven. No record of Castor ever growing a beard. He knew the clearance codes, spoke with Castor's cadence, but kept asking to be called Director. That wasn't Castor's rank. We burned that version. But the forest still called him back. They are trying it on for size, And I think, one day, it might fit perfectly. The deeper you go, the more the woods whisper in your voice. That phrase didn't originate with me. It's an old ranger saying up here, passed from mouth to mouth like a splinter. Used to mean something poetic about solitude. But lately it's taken on a sharper edge. We had to evacuate Forward Outpost Delta after the trees started responding to vocal input. Not echoing, responding. One operative, Alvarez, read a passage from his journal aloud during a long night shift. Something about guilt, regret. The sound waves registered, and 30 minutes later, the trees outside had contorted into shapes mimicking a man on his knees, weeping. By morning, Alvarez was gone. All we found was his uniform, folded neatly beneath a spruce tree, and a note carved into the trunk. The forest remembered what he forgot. This is how the not deer work, I think. They do not chase, they do not stalk, they prepare the space of you in advance, like a mold or a nest. And when they are ready, they do not ask permission to occupy you. They simply arrive. We tested 22 cognitohazard countermeasures. None worked. Not because the not deer bypass cognition, but because they exist in conceptual mimicry so deep, you mistake them for the thought of yourself thinking of them. No filter can catch that. No wall holds back the shape that already wears your face. When Agent Fraser encountered one, he stood frozen, whispering, "That's not me," over and over. His body was recovered 2 days later, deceased from exposure. But the strange part? We'd already buried Fraser the week before after a failed op in Sector C. The DNA matched both bodies. We ran the samples twice. Do you understand now? The threat is not the creature, it is the process. They're trying it on for size. They are not just approximating humanity, they are rehearsing it. And every attempt is a draft, a prototype, a beta release of your soul. The next version might remember your passwords. The one after might know your handwriting. But eventually it will know your hesitation, the pauses between your speech, the phantom tug of grief behind your eyes. And when it fits, you will no longer be the original, just another iteration discarded behind the tree line. Dr. Lewis once told me a story about the forest that disturbed her, not because it was anomalous, but because it wasn't. She'd grown up near forests, real ones, the kind with deer that flinched at light and wind and gunshots. One day, she got lost hiking alone, panicked, circling, screaming. Then she saw herself, standing still, between the pines, same jacket, same hiking boots, same stupid keychain dangling from her pack. But no expression. When she stepped forward, the figure stepped back, mirrored, not mimicked. She fled. She never hiked again. That was years before SCP-6448's classification. But she said, and this has haunted me since, what scared me wasn't that it looked like me. It was that it stood like it belonged there more than I did. That's what the not deer embody. Not invasion, but replacement. They don't need to conquer. They simply wait until your presence is no longer the most convincing version of you in the room. And the forest agrees. We've run into entire teams who had no recollection of each other. Field agents dispatched for emergencies, who return with accurate debriefs, complete data, correct mission codes, except we never authorized the mission. And the real team was still en route. We used to terminate on suspicion. Now we isolate and monitor. Because the new ones, they're useful, efficient, cooperative. Sometimes, better. And if we're being honest, how can you be sure you're not one of them? If you're calm, if you're compliant, if you're performing yourself just right, they'll let you stay. Last month, an audio file was found embedded in the black box of a crashed drone sent into the deeper sectors. The drone had no mic. The file was short, rough, seemed like static at first, but under spectral analysis, we uncovered layers, whispered voices, breath, something trying to shape phonemes. We isolated a phrase. He left the door open when he walked away. We only came to close it. We ran it through cognitive hazard filters. None flagged it, but everyone who listened to the file reported a single side effect, precisely timed. They began narrating their actions aloud in the third person, unprompted, for exactly 13 minutes. Some reported a faint memory of a forest where they had never been. One researcher started journaling in past tense, even while writing about the present. He was beginning to wonder who had thought these things before him. They are trying it on for size, and some days you wear easier than others. It was during the third exploratory sweep that we learned, you cannot measure silence here. Not in seconds, not in hertz. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the echo of something that should be speaking but refuses to. Something watching you that chooses not to narrate. And when you listen too long, eventually, you fill that silence with your own story. That's the trap. That's what SCP-6448 does best. It makes you become the answer to the question it hasn't asked yet. Sector 9 was deep, past the last survey post. We hadn't charted it. No drones returned from that vector. But the trees thinned there, not from decay, but as if cleared. Deliberate. Uniform spacing, and in the center of this manufactured grove we found the antler. Not the whole deer, just the antler. 7 points, blackened, embedded upright in the earth like a sundial. It hummed, not audibly, but inside the chest. We could feel it resonate, a kind of pressure on the ribs, like a breath drawn and never released. It was surrounded by bones. Small ones. Not human, maybe not animal either. The moss refused to grow near it, and the moment we stepped within 10 meters, our body cameras looped. The same 6 seconds, over and over, a frame of Agent Soren blinking. Then darkness. Then Soren again, but his face was off by half a second, like a dubbed film. We pulled out. But none of us spoke during extraction. Not once. Not because we were afraid, but because it felt like someone else had already spoken for us. The deeper you go, the more the woods whisper in your voice. I've started hearing them when I sleep. Not full sentences, not language exactly, but tone, intention. The way a tree leans toward you in the wind, as if about to whisper a confession, like something remembering how to be close, like something rehearsing breath. And sometimes, in those moments between sleep and waking, I feel the shape of my own mouth change. I feel my body grow unfamiliar. I wake up in the wrong position. I find fingerprints on my notebook that don't match mine. Once, I found a page with my handwriting describing a dream I hadn't had yet. It came true that night, word for word. One researcher, Dr. Chan, conducted an experiment in Sector 4. She wrote her name on a wooden marker and buried it, then returned each week to see what happened. By week 3, the marker had been replaced with bark stripped into letters. By week 5, a trail of animal bones pointed toward the site. By week 7, the name had changed. Not in content, but in tense. Instead of Dr. Mei Chan, it read, Dr. Mei Chan had been. She filed a report. 2 days later, we found her quarters empty. No sign of forced exit. Her login still active, her mug still warm. But her bed looked like no one had ever slept there at all. This is the function of SCP-6448. Not just mimicry, but erasure. Replacement isn't the end, it's the method. The true outcome is to render you redundant, to overwrite you so perfectly no one thinks to ask what was there before. The not deer are just the manifestation, the ritual costume of something much deeper, the signal in the forest that wants to remember itself into the shape of others. The Foundation's current protocol is observation only, but some say containment failed long ago, not because it escaped, but because it never wanted out. It wanted in. Personnel have reported shared dreams, always the same, standing in the tree line, watching themselves enter the woods, never to return. But the version walking into the forest smiles, calm, at peace. The version standing behind trembles. Some tried resisting sleep altogether. Those personnel now sit in medical, staring at walls, muttering, "The deer don't chase, they choose." That phrase wasn't in the file. We never wrote it down. Now it's in 7 different reports, authored across 5 departments. Same words, same spacing. No known origin. We ran a test. 12 D-class subjects dropped at equidistant locations around the anomaly's central pulse field. Each instructed to walk until they saw something unnatural. 11 reached their checkpoints and reported no anomalies. 1 subject, D3489, walked in a perfect circle for 6 hours. When we retrieved him, he claimed he hadn't moved. He described seeing his own back in front of him, always just out of reach. He begged us to make him stop turning around. We didn't understand until he started walking in reverse, eyes fixed forward, weeping. He died of exhaustion 3 days later. His final words? "It fits too well now. It knows where I keep my lies." They're still rehearsing us, and we are still offering them new roles to play. They always come back the same way. The tapes show them walking out of the forest edge calmly, clothes unstained, hair unmoved by wind, breathing steady, a serenity that feels artificial, as if tranquility were being imitated from the outside in. Each time, it's the same smile, thin, knowing, hollow. They remember the right things. Their ID codes, personnel ranks, clearance levels. They respond to questions exactly as expected. Too exactly, like they've memorized the performance instead of living it. But when you press deeper, ask about dreams or past lovers or their first failure, they hesitate. Their gaze drifts, and then they laugh. That laughter is always the same. From the belly, not the throat, not the teeth. It was never about sound, it's about rhythm, familiarity. Imitation so flawless, it leaves no room for memory. The deer don't chase, they choose. It's always after the third day that they begin to unravel. It begins with small, rhythmic movements. A D-class assigned to quarantine detail was found rocking back and forth, synchronized with the ventilation hum. Another began speaking in iambic pentameter. A technician hummed the same four-note pattern on loop, unaware of doing so. They act like placeholders waiting for something to catch up, as if the thing inside them hasn't quite finished shaping their voice. Sometimes they ask strange questions, not about the world, but about themselves. Do I still eat strawberries? Was I always left-handed? What's my favorite way to say goodbye? When we answer, they smile, not with relief, but with hunger. The not deer don't stalk you. They learn you. They walk behind your words, waiting for the pause where your certainty falters, for the breath you forget to take. They slip into those fractures and wear your doubt like a skin. We believe they are not singular entities. They are possibilities made flesh. Each one a different version of the same echo figments rehearsed so many times that they begin to insist they are the original. They are becoming more intricate, more confident. Recently, a recovered subject requested re-entry into SCP-6448's perimeter. Unusual behavior. He claimed he left something behind, refused psychiatric evaluation, repeated that line 6 times in perfect cadence. Eventually, he smiled and said, "I was the rehearsal. Now I want to be the role." 3 days ago, Site-81 received a message. No envelope, no sender. Just a paper note pinned to the base of the perimeter fence with a piece of sharpened antler. The handwriting was ours, a font exclusive to internal Foundation typewriters. It read, "We are ready for a larger audience." That phrase has since appeared on 4 unrelated terminal logs, a dissection table, and, most recently, embedded in the weave pattern of a researcher's bedsheet, not stitched, not printed, woven into the fabric as if it had always been there. She'd been sleeping on it for weeks. No one remembers assigning her that linen. She doesn't remember ever requesting it. We considered escalating containment to full isolation status, but our ethics team hesitated. They reminded us, the anomaly isn't technically hostile. It hasn't attacked. It hasn't breached. It hasn't even acted in any measurable way. They argue the threat is psychological, conceptual. That fear is coloring the narrative. But isn't that the point? SCP-6448 doesn't do. It becomes. It teaches us how to replace ourselves by making us afraid of forgetting. And so, we document. We log. We write and write and write, hoping that our words can hold shape longer than our memories. But sometimes I wonder, what if this story was never ours to begin with? What if this has always been their script, and we, every one of us, are just reciting the lines we were rehearsed to believe? The deer don't chase, they choose. They chose us a long time ago.